Hello, friends, and welcome to our third Bible study concerning the book of Job. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. I'm hoping that you have viewed our previous recordings. They are recordings and not live interactions on purpose. Yes, I would love to talk with you live, and sometimes I have, but when it comes to studies and sermons, I don't want there to be electronic glitches. I don't want us to be interrupted with bad reception. And sometimes when you have live studies or live interactions, people are logging in and you can see them logging in on your screen, which can be a distraction not only to you, but sometimes to me as well. I mean, we welcome people coming on, but you can't really listen to what is being said for looking at who's logging on. And so I want your undivided attention, and I thank you for it in advance. Please, if you will, turn to the book of Job, the Old Testament book of Job. If you would, have your pencil and paper, your pens, your electronic tabs out so that you can take copious notes. I want to thank you in advance again for your dedication to this study. We won't keep you too long, but we do have something to say. As you know, Job is one of the most highly praised literary works known to humankind and was so regarded by Tennyson and Carlyle, in addition to great philosophers such as Martin Luther and a host of other biblical scholars. In our English Bible, the book of Job is the first of 5 poetic books, also Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon. And of it, these books, brothers and sisters, when it comes to the book of Job, Job is the first classified in the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, which would also include the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. And we're talking about the real figure of the book of Job. And you cannot really enter the book of Job and talk about Job himself without talking about who is one of the main people in the book, and that is God. It is God who gets our complete attention. Yes, we are transfixed concerning the life of Job and what Job goes through. But many of us are even more so interested in the elephant in the room, and that being God himself and how God is allowing things to happen to this perfect and upright man, a man of wisdom, a man who feared God, which means, translated to mean a religious man, and eschewed or avoided evil as much as possible. In our previous videos, I shared with you the background of Job, that he was considered a perfect person in the eyes of God. That does not mean he was a perfect person indeed, but that his desire was as perfect as you can get to please God, to be a person that God would be pleased with. This was a balanced man, a transparent man, a man who was in touch with God, in touch with himself, and in touch with his family. This was indeed a man with a stellar reputation. It does not mean that he was sinless, but whenever he sinned, his religion was on display. His relationship with God was indeed on display, that he asked God constantly for forgiveness. Because even this man, this businessman, this leader of his family, this priest of his own home, had a good theology about God. He was very aware of whom God was and is, and what kind of God he was serving, a God who was omnipotent and omniscient, one who was omnipresent, one who is self-existent. He knew God well. And that's a point where all of us could really pause right here, because since God is all of those things and more, let's talk about God as a preface to our in-depth study. How omnipotent is God? And omnipotent means that God has all power. Omni, all, and power, potent. God is omnipotent. God is omnipotent. God can do anything. God can do anything. According to the natural attributes of God, nothing is too hard for God. God can do anything unless it is a logical contradiction. For instance, can God sin? Well, no, God cannot sin, because to make God sinful will to make him less than perfect, and would make him less than holy. And the reason why he is God, and the reason why we worship him as God, because he is sinless and he is the perfect creator. That is according to our theology. And of course, within the context of having all power is having all knowledge, which means God knows everything. The question comes, does God know the future? Well, I think it answers itself. Of course, a subtopic of that is, does God see the future? And that goes really into a line of demarcation between God's natural knowledge and God's perceptual knowledge. God really more so has conceptual knowledge, a form of knowledge, and not a perceptional a form of knowledge. God has an innate knowledge of truth and future. God does not need to look into the future perceptually to know anything conceptually. God doesn't really think, God just knows. But what God knows is written in anthropomorphic language, in human language, even in a narrative way, as we see on display in the book of Job, for our edification. It looks like God is progressive in God's ways, but God actually knows everything from the beginning, which raises its own question, brothers and sisters, about the book of Job, because when you read it, it looks as if, it appears as if God is on a discovery himself concerning his own creation, concerning his beloved servant named Job. And let's go into that, shall we? Because prior to all of this, again, our Job, our brother, he is a man, again, who is known as being perfect and upright. Upright, meaning he had a good standing with God and was in good standing with his family and within his community. He was a man of his word. He was upright. He had a great reputation. His word was his bond. And that not only made him a good believer, but it made him a good leader. It made him a good parent. It made him a good spouse. It made him a good father. He was just a good man, to the point that even in the conversation that was happening on the other side of existence between God and the Satan, that God even bragged on Job by saying, have you considered my servant Job? And brothers and sisters, this is something to really pause, to think about. Put yourself in the mind of Job, in the place of Job. Here is Job, man of perfect, upright, a man that feared God. And, fear is the beginning of wisdom, which means he was blessed with wisdom, what to do and what not to do. That not only went along with his business, because he owned acres of land and he had so many faithful workers, but it also went to his family. He was on good terms with his wife. He used his wisdom within his marriage and within his family. And whenever he thought that even his family had sinned against God, he would offer sacrifices on their behalf, because ultimately he wanted to make sure that he, as the father of the house, and in particular the sons whom he gave lots of sacrifices for, were in good relationship with God. Why? Because although his children, all 10 of them, 7 men and 3 women, although they were raised in a family home and they were raised in a godly home, did not mean that they will always do godly things. They would even perhaps think of things that were not pleasing in God's sight. And since God knows the heart of a person, and then whether you think something or not, you've done it in your heart concerning the mind of God or in the mind of God. And what I'm trying to say is, if you think it, you've done it. If you want to commit sin, if it started in the heart, it's just a matter of time before it's reflected in your actions. And, Job's children may not have acted out in the sinful way, but if they even thought it, Job did not want that to be counted against them. He did not want God's wrath on his home. And so God saw that Job was one who feared him and eschewed evil. That's right. He got away from evil. He avoided evil situations or sinful temptations. He did that for his family. He did that for himself. And especially, he did that for God. This is a man who feared God and eschewed evil. He got away from evil. But what he did not know was that evil was on its way to him. That's right. And in the last study, brothers and sisters, we talked about that very briefly. Let's get into that, shall we? Let's read these passages of scripture. It says, there was in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, a man that was perfect and upright, a man that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance was also 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-asses and very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all men of the East. Listen to that. I mean, this man was of stellar status in the eyes of God and in the eyes of humanity. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. If you notice, brothers and sisters, as we go through this particular book, that the scene switches from heaven to earth and earth to heaven. You just have to follow as it goes. But it says in verse 5, and so it was when the days of their feasting was gone about. And we covered these scriptures. I invite you to cover them yourself or look at them yourself or listen to them, or view them in our previous videos. We covered all of this. And it was so when the days of their feasting were gone about that Job sent and sanctified them and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be, watch, that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. And then we go on with verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also with them. We talked about this, that the angels, the messengers of God, were going to and fro out of the sanctuary of God on the other side of existence. We can't really explain it because we haven't been there, but the writer pictures it as such just a spectacular place, a throne for the holy, and messengers, angels, the sons of God, go in and out doing the bidding of God, and they are privy to, they have access to information that no one else has on earth except the prophets that God decided to reveal things to in his own time. And they're going to and fro. And here they are having another private meeting. And all of a sudden, and the Satan, the adversary, is invited to go up with them into this meeting. And this is where we have to put our thinking caps on. And we have to address the elephants in the room about this. Why in the world, from our human understanding, with no disrespect to God in saying this, why does this angel, who has proven himself to be an enemy to God and an enemy to humankind, why does he have VIP access? He can interrupt, he can come through. Why didn't one of the other angels stop him? You know, the other 2/3 that decided not to go with him when Satan decided to persuade them way before all of this started and rebel against God. And yet God knew before the creation of his creation, God knew what Satan was doing with the third of God's angels that he persuaded to go against him, and expelled all of them from the other side of existence, expelled them from the kingdom of God because they tried to usurp God's authority. And Jesus even tapped into the preexistence of his own self, told the disciples, I beheld Satan falling as zigzag lightning. And he did fall, but he did not fall to his death. He fell down near around the Garden of Eden, which raises another question. Why allow such a being that was able to persuade over a third of your angels to be even anywhere near your blessed and sacred and innocent creation? Obviously, the Satan was persuasive. He was powerful. And yet, for whatever reason, God's own reasons of foreknowledge, he knows then from the beginning, he decides that he would allow this to happen. And so the Satan is in close proximity with God's creation. Adam and Eve are approached by a serpent that was being used, almost like a ventriloquist would use a puppet used to talk to Eve and then to Adam. They sin against God as a result of that. And they are not only punished, but the serpent is punished. But yet again, the Satan does not die. And so here he is. He's allowed into the presence of angels, and he messed some of them up. And he is allowed in the presence of Adam and Eve, and he messes them up. Although they had free moral will to do God's will or go against God's will, they were still persuaded to do that by the Satan. And here is the Satan roaming to and fro, seeking whom he may devour. That's his report to God in this celestial court with all the other angels. He's even asked, where have you been? Oh, roaming to and fro, seeking through whom I may devour. God first, addresses the Satan in the midst of all of them as if he knows he's not supposed to be there. The question is, the elephant in his room is not only why are you there, but why are you on speaking terms with God? And why are you allowed to say anything or do anything? Why are you left to hunt and haunt God's creation? You've done enough mess. Why are you allowed to do any of it again? These are the elephants in the room. And it is relevant to where we are as well now. Why is the Satan still allowed to be a part of this world? Well, we'll get to that a little later, will we not? But he's allowed to be a part of God's creation, to roam a part of God's creation. And then what God does is he does not punish him for even trying to do that, but he lifts up our brother Job as a person of consideration. Have you considered my servant Job? Job knows nothing of this. And his ignorance of all this is key to this book as we'll go through it. Had he known, the dialogue, the narrative may have been a little different. But Job knows none of this. He is caring for his family. He's doing what he's doing on the human side. But on the other side, this closed meeting is occurring. And this dialogue between the holy and the hellish is happening. And there was a day in the 6th verse when the sons of God came to present themselves before God, and Satan came also with them. And the Lord said unto Satan, when comest thou? And then Satan answered the Lord, saying, from going to and fro, just restless, seeking whom I may devour is what's really said, and walking up and down on the earth. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered thy servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth? Why? It's not sacrosanct, brothers and sisters, to ask why. Get involved with what is being said here. Engage yourself with this, because what is going to happen as a result of this conversation comes upon Job. and could very well come upon all of us. Sometimes you have to wonder, when all the hell is breaking out in your home, it's best that you tried your best to do your best, to be your best for God. Have you ever considered that there has been some kind of conversation in the heavenlies? Have you considered my friends at New Vine? Have you considered my saved ones? Have you considered them to hit with a pandemic? Have you considered them to hurt, to harm? Have you considered testing them? Brothers and sisters, this is powerful because this is evil. The Satan is evil. And yet watch what God does. He says in verse 9, then Satan answered the Lord, does Job not fear God for naught? I mean, he's challenging God as if God doesn't know already. Look, your servant is serving you only because you have a hedge around him, only because you have blessed him so much. But if you take away the hedge, if you take away of the heavenly things, if you take away his